There's a lot going on under the hood inside of Blender, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to manipulate any of the preferences so you can really customize Blender to how you want it to be. Now, the first thing is the startup file. So if I go to File Defaults, you'll see I can always load the factory settings, or I can save a customized startup file. Now, here's the thing. Your quick favorites, if I go to Tab, Q, you can see my Subdivide and Triangulate are still there. They'll transfer no matter what blend I'm using, but my workspaces are dependent per blend file. So if I had a custom workspace, let me just make one really quick here. And just to make sure that it's a custom workspace, we'll just move this over here and switch this to a random editor like Outliner. What I want to do to save that workspace is go to File, Defaults, Save Startup File. So now when I start a brand new Blender file, my workspace is already saved and there to use, and including, if I go to Tab, Q, my quick favorites. Now let's come up to Edit Preferences and look at some of the cool preferences that you can manipulate. The first one right off the bat is Resolution Scale under Interface. Lets you do quite a bit, so we can change that to whatever we want. I'll just leave it at 1 for right now. Of course, you can turn on and off tooltips and other interesting things. You can come to themes and customize the theme to whatever you want, Blender Light, Blender Dark, or if you're really ambitious, you can go ahead and specify color for each and every single user interface option. Under Viewport, you have more items that you can manipulate and play with, including the ability to limit the size of textures if, say, you don't have a lot of video RAM on your video card. You can go to Lights and specify your own HDRIs. Under Editing, you can specify, for example, what things get duplicated when you hit Control or Shift D. Under Animation, you can change how you set keyframes, whether it's visual or only insert what you need. You can even have warnings for auto keyframe if you leave it on by mistake. Or, and this is dangerous, you can even turn on negative frames. Add-ons are like plugins for Blender that are distributed by the Blender Foundation and developers around the Blender world. You can turn them on or off, and Blender ships with a whole bunch of them already by default installed, but you're going to want to hit a checkbox to make sure you turn them on or off. Input, for those of you without a numpad, and I highly recommend to have one for Blender because it makes it a lot faster to use. But if you don't, or if you're on a laptop, you can emulate a numpad, so that way the numbers 1 through 0 on your keyboard emulate the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. on your numpad. So for example, if I were to come over here, I can now hit 1 and go to my front view on my numpad, or 1 on my keyboard. Or I can hit 5 and 5 to switch between the two. It's really handy if you're on a laptop. I'll turn that off for now. Under Navigation, you can play with your navigation settings. Key Map, now this is really vital, especially if you come from other 3D software or previous Blender versions. You can pick using old Blender shortcuts, or if you're used to Maya and ZBrush, you can go to Industry Compatible, and that will use the Maya and ZBrush hotkeys, really handy. Over here, you have your famous left-click or right-click select, depending on which one you want to use, and what you want your spacebar to do. For example, you can come over here and hit spacebar, and you can see every single command inside of Blender. You can just type it in, like smooth. I can come back to my edit preferences and switch that to anything else that I want it to be. But by default, I'll leave it to play. And even get some really cool options like extra shading pie menus. I really like this because if I come back to my view here, I can hit Z and I get even more options like toggle X-ray. Let's go back to our preferences and go to System. Over here, I can specify my cycles rendering device. So if I have a really beefy graphics card, like a GeForce GTX 1080, I can turn that on and that'll give me way more power and the ability to use cycles a lot faster. If I come to Save and Load, this is going to save your life right here. Autosave. Autosave will happen every 2 minutes. That's actually a good amount, but you can always come up to Save Versions and have a few extra versions to save. And finally, File Paths. For those of you using Windows, it'll default to your Windows Fonts directory for any fonts that you have. Your autosaves and other files will be saved in this directory, and you can even specify where your render caches and outputs will go. And the cool thing is all of this gets saved automatically unless you click this little hamburger icon and turn off autosave. In that case, you'll have to actually literally click Save Preferences. But I'm just going to leave it on, and if I ever need a reset, I can just go to Reset to Defaults. And there you have it, the ability to customize Blender and change it into any kind of thing that you want it to be to make your workflow a lot easier.